You were taught that success comes from classrooms, degrees, and credentials, that if you stay inside the system long enough, it will eventually reward you. But if you look closely, many of the most successful people never followed that path. So the real question becomes, what did they understand that most people never learn? There exists a set of principles rarely taught, almost never fully explained, that have quietly built fortunes, created empires, and transformed ordinary individuals into forces impossible to ignore. Not theory, not speculation, but something tested, proven, and hidden in plain sight. Most people spend years gathering information, yet still feel trapped, uncertain, and dissatisfied because knowledge alone does not create power. There is something deeper, something that determines whether what you learn ever becomes something useful. What if real education was never meant to be confined to lecture halls? What if the most valuable lessons are the ones that train you to recognize opportunity where others see limits? Imagine possessing a blueprint not for passing examinations, but for mastering life itself. A way to understand how successful people truly think, how they respond under pressure, how they turn setbacks into stepping stones rather than stopping points. This is where most people misunderstand success. They believe it is complicated, that it requires something rare, something unreachable, something beyond them. Yet the truth is different. Success follows patterns, clear and repeatable patterns anyone can learn if they are willing to recognize them. There are principles that govern as laws govern nature. You cannot escape them. You can only ignore them or align with them. And those who choose alignment begin to experience results that seem extraordinary to others. But here is what changes everything. These principles are not only about money. They shape confidence, persistence, and the ability to think clearly when everything around you feels uncertain. They build something far more valuable than income. They build control. Most people drift. They react to circumstances, follow routines they never questioned, and hope things will improve. But hope is not strategy. Time does not reward hesitation. It rewards deliberate action. Consider this. What if you have been trying to succeed without ever understanding the rules of the game? What if you have been working hard but moving in the wrong direction? That realization alone can change everything. Because once you see the principles, you cannot unsee them. You begin to recognize why some people rise quickly while others remain stuck. You start to notice the decisions, habits, and thought patterns that separate one life from another. Suddenly, success no longer feels random. It becomes predictable. But there is a price. Not money, but awareness. You must be willing to question what you have been told, to look beyond appearances, to accept that what you have been chasing may not be the real key at all. Most people will never do this. They will continue following familiar paths, even when those paths lead nowhere, because it feels safer, easier, more accepted. But comfort rarely creates transformation. The few who break that pattern discover something powerful. They realize success is not reserved for the chosen. Apply the right principles consistently, without compromise. And once that understanding takes hold, everything begins to shift. Your thinking changes. Your actions sharpen. Your direction becomes clearer. The results you once thought were impossible begin moving closer, as though they were waiting for you to finally recognize this. This is not about rejecting education. It is about completing it, filling in the missing pieces that were never taught, learning how to turn what you know into something real, tangible, and effective. Because in the end, the question is not how much you know. It is what you do with what you know. Hidden within these principles lies the answer most people spend their entire lives searching for. Let us begin with a truth many overlook, though it stands before them every day. A man can gather knowledge for a lifetime and remain powerless if he has not first decided what he will do with that knowledge. Education, as commonly understood, prepares the mind to receive information, but it does not command that mind toward a definite direction. Without direction, knowledge scatters, and what is scattered cannot produce power. There comes a moment in every life when drifting must end and command must begin. Not a wish, not a preference, but a command so clear it leaves no room for confusion. It is in that moment a man separates himself from the majority, spend their lives reacting to circumstance rather than shaping it. I recall the story of a young man who stood at such a moment. He possessed no obvious advantage. He was unknown, unconnected, and without means. Yet within him lived a thought so definite it overshadowed every limitation. He decided, not hoped, not imagined, that he would stand in business beside a man whose name was already known throughout the world. This decision did not emerge from comfort. It emerged from definiteness. And definiteness holds a peculiar power. It gathers the scattered forces of the mind and directs them toward one end. It removes the habit of wandering from idea to idea. It replaces hesitation with movement. Most men, though educated, lack this power because they have never trained themselves to decide what they truly want in unmistakable terms. They claim to desire success, yet never define it. They speak of opportunity, yet never name it. And because they do not name it, they fail to recognize it when it appears. A ruling command within his mind lives differently. He measures every action against that command. He accepts what serves it and rejects what does not. His time becomes ordered, his efforts aligned, his thinking clear. Others begin to notice the change. They observe that he no longer shifts direction with every opinion. He no longer seeks approval at every step. He speaks with quiet certainty that needs no explanation. This is the first sign that a man has taken possession of himself. You must understand this principle is not complicated. It requires no extraordinary talent. It requires only that you decide firmly what you intend to accomplish and hold that decision without compromise. When you do this, knowledge becomes power, and intention becomes movement. But a command once given is not enough, and the strongest decision weakens if left unfed. This brings us to the second principle, without which the first cannot survive. A decision is like a flame. Left unattended, it fades. Guarded and fed, it grows. Most men begin with enthusiasm, but enthusiasm fades because it is not maintained. They mistake excitement for desire, and when excitement passes, they assume purpose has vanished. True desire is not excitement. It is controlled fire. It does not flare and disappear. It burns steadily, growing stronger through attention and repetition. The young man I spoke of understood this, though he may not have named it. Each day he returned to his purpose. He strengthened it through thought. He refused to allow it to cool under the influence of doubt or distraction. While others let ambition fade, he nourished his. The world is filled with forces that weaken desire. Idle talk, fear of criticism, the comfort of routine. These pour water on the flame. The man who succeeds does not allow these influences to dominate his mind. He guards his purpose as a man guards treasure. This requires effort because the mind never remains empty. If you do not feed desire, something else will replace it. Doubt enters. Fear grows. The flame weakens. The difference between weak desire and strong desire reveals itself through action. Weak desire delays. It waits for favorable conditions. Strong desire moves to certainty. It compels action because it cannot be ignored. You will notice this in those who achieve. They do not waste themselves in idle pursuits. Their energy is directed. They speak less of what they might do and more of what they are doing. Others notice this too. They see that you are no longer easily distracted. You remain focused. That focus alone separates you from those who continue drifting. There is a test you must apply to your own desire. Does it remain when excitement fades? Does it persist when obstacles appear? Does it compel action when reward is not immediate? If it does, it is real. If not, it must be strengthened. Strength comes through repetition. Each day you must return to your purpose. Think upon it. Speak it. Feel it. Treat it as real before it takes physical form. In doing so, you keep the flame alive. And as that flame grows, it produces something even greater. It shapes belief. A thought repeated with feeling does not remain thought. It becomes accepted as truth. And that acceptance marks the beginning of the third principle. A man may possess strong desire and still fail if he does not believe in its fulfillment. Desire pushes forward, but belief removes resistance. Without belief, action is uncertain. With belief, action becomes confident and sustained. Most men wait for proof before they believe. They say, "When I see results, I will believe." But this reverses the natural order. The successful man believes first, and belief produces results. The young man we have followed possessed no evidence his aim would be achieved. Nothing in his surroundings justified confidence. Yet he believed. He acted as though success were certain. And by acting so, he created the conditions that made success possible. Belief is not given. It is built. It is formed through repeated thought, just as fear is formed through repeated doubt. The process is identical. Only direction differs. You must train your mind deliberately. Each day, replace doubt with certainty. Speak your purpose with conviction. Imagine fulfillment. Feel as though it has already been achieved. This strengthens belief. At first, it may feel unnatural. The mind resists unfamiliar ideas, but repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity becomes acceptance. Others will notice this change. They will observe that you no longer question yourself as before. There is calm assurance in your manner. This calmness is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of belief. It allows action even when outcomes remain uncertain. It gives courage to continue when others stop. Belief changes how you see the world. When you expect success, you notice opportunity. When you expect failure, you notice obstacles. The environment remains the same. Your interpretation changes. Guard belief carefully. Replace doubt immediately. Continue acting as though success were assured. When belief is firmly established, action follows naturally. And in that moment, you possess something no degree can provide: the power to act with certainty before the world agrees with you. These principles are only the beginning, but mastered together, they become the foundation upon which every extraordinary life is built. If you are ready to become who you know you were meant to be, I created the Second Life to give you a complete path built from timeless success principles, so you can finally create real change, greater wealth, better health, stronger relationships, inner peace, and a life that fully reflects your potential. Click the first link in the description and become who you were. Once a man learns to act with belief, he begins to discover something most people never understand. The mind does not merely respond to circumstance, it creates it. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually, through repeated thought, repeated action, and repeated expectation. What a man consistently holds within himself eventually begins to shape what appears around him. This is why two men can stand before the same opportunity and see entirely different realities. One sees risk, the other sees possibility. One hesitates, the other moves. And over time, those small differences in perception create completely different lives. The majority never recognize this because they are too occupied reacting. They move from one distraction to another, one crisis to another, without ever asking themselves who is directing their thoughts. But the man who becomes self-directed understands that attention is power. Whatever controls your attention begins to control your future. If your attention begins to control your future. If your mind is consumed by fear, fear shapes your actions. If your mind is consumed by limitation, limitation defines your results. But if your attention is fixed upon growth, purpose, and disciplined action, then gradually your entire life begins to organize itself around those things. This is not coincidence, it is law. You must therefore become selective with what enters your mind. The conversations you tolerate, the information you consume, the voices you listen to, all of these either strengthen your direction or weaken it. Most people allow outside influences to dominate their thinking without resistance. They absorb negativity without question and wonder why their energy disappears. The man who succeeds guards his mind carefully. He does not expose himself endlessly to confusion, doubt, and distraction. He understands that the mind reflects what it is repeatedly fed. Consider the difference between a man who spends each day surrounded by complaint and one who spends each day strengthening his purpose. One becomes exhausted without understanding why. The other grows stronger with time. Their environments shape their thinking, and their thinking shapes their actions. Shapes their actions. This is why discipline over attention is essential. You cannot build a powerful life with a distracted mind. At first, controlling attention feels difficult because the modern world is designed to pull your focus in every direction. Noise surrounds you constantly. Endless opinions, endless entertainment, endless interruption. Most men never learn to resist it. They become mentally scattered, unable to hold a single thought long enough to transform it into reality. But the man who learns concentration gains an extraordinary advantage. He can think clearly while others panic. He can remain steady while others become emotional. He can continue moving toward his purpose while others lose themselves in distraction. Over time, this ability appears almost unnatural to those around him because focus itself has become rare. You must train this ability deliberately. Set aside moments where your mind is not divided. Think deeply. Reflect carefully. Return your attention again and again to the life you intend to create. The mind strengthens through use, just as the body does. And the more you direct it consciously, the less easily it is controlled by circumstance. There is another effect that follows this discipline. Your decisions begin to improve. Most poor decisions are not made because a man lacks intelligence. They are made because his thinking is clouded. Emotion overrides judgment. Distraction weakens clarity. Pressure creates confusion. But when attention is controlled, thinking becomes ordered. You begin to recognize what truly matters and what merely demands reaction. This alone separates leaders from followers. The follower reacts to events. The leader interprets them. The follower waits for direction. The leader creates it. And this difference begins first within the mind. As your attention strengthens, your confidence changes as well. Not because you force confidence, but because clarity removes uncertainty. A man who knows where he is going no longer wastes energy questioning every step. He moves with intention. Others notice this immediately. They sense stability in your presence. They recognize that you are no longer easily influenced by every passing opinion. Your words carry more weight because they are backed by certainty. And certainty, when combined with disciplined action, becomes influence. But influence must be used carefully. Many men seek power before they develop character, and when they gain influence, they misuse it. True strength is not found in controlling others. It is found in controlling oneself. The man who cannot govern his own emotions, impulses, and habits will eventually lose control of everything else as well. This is why inner discipline always comes before outer success. Without it, achievement becomes unstable. Wealth creates arrogance. Power creates carelessness. Success creates weakness. History is filled with men who gain the world outwardly while collapsing inwardly because they never developed mastery over themselves. The truly successful man builds both. He strengthens his external results while also strengthening his internal foundation. He develops patience alongside ambition, discipline alongside vision, humility alongside confidence. In this way, success does not destroy him, it refines him. And eventually, there comes a moment when he no longer pursues success only for himself. He begins to understand that the highest form of achievement is contribution. At first, most men desire success because they wish to escape limitation. They want freedom, security, recognition. There is nothing wrong with this. But over time, the truly developed man realizes fulfillment does not come from possession alone. It comes from purpose expressed through service. He begins asking a different question, not only how can I succeed, but how can I create value? This shift changes everything. The man who focuses only on himself eventually becomes empty, regardless of what he accumulates. But the man who uses his growth to strengthen others discovers a deeper form of meaning. His work gains significance beyond personal reward. And strangely, it's often at this stage that success multiplies most powerfully, because value attracts opportunity. The world rewards those who solve problems, create improvement, and elevate the lives of others. The more useful you become, the more difficult you are to replace. And the more difficult you are to replace, the greater your influence becomes. This is why true success is never accidental. It is built layer by layer, thought by thought, decision by decision, habit by habit, until eventually the man who once doubted himself becomes someone entirely different. Not because fate selected him, but because he selected himself. And once a man has truly selected himself, he can no longer return to the life he once accepted. Something within him changes permanently. He begins to recognize that limitations are often inherited long before they are examined. Ideas about what is possible, what is realistic, what should or should not be attempted are absorbed from the world around him long before he learns to think independently. Most men never question these invisible boundaries. They inherit beliefs from family, environment, education, and society, then mistake those beliefs for truth. In this way, they build lives confined by assumptions they never consciously chose. But the self-directed man begins to examine everything. He asks himself whether the limits he accepts are real or merely repeated. He notices how often people surrender dreams, not because achievement is impossible, but because discouragement became stronger than vision. He sees how entire lives are shaped by the quiet decision to stop trying. This realization is uncomfortable at first, because once you recognize that many limitations were accepted rather than proven, responsibility returns to you. You can no longer blame circumstance for every result. You must confront the possibility that your future depends largely upon the standards you are willing to hold yourself to. And standards determine destiny. Every man lives according to a set of standards, whether consciously or unconsciously. Some tolerate delay, distraction, dishonesty, and weakness from themselves daily. Others refuse to accept anything beneath discipline, integrity, and growth. Over time, these standards shape identity. The man who continually lowers his standards weakens himself without noticing. Small compromises accumulate. One broken promise becomes another. One excuse becomes a habit. Eventually, he no longer trusts himself because he has trained himself not to. But the man who raises his standards transforms gradually from the inside outward. He begins demanding more from his thoughts, his actions, his environment, and his time. He no longer asks whether discipline is convenient. He asks whether it is necessary. He no longer measures choices by temporary comfort, but by long-term consequence. This is where true maturity begins. Not when a man gains age, but when he gains responsibility over himself. At this stage, sacrifice also takes on a different meaning. Most people view sacrifice as loss. They focus on what must be given up. But the disciplined man understands that every meaningful achievement requires exchange. To gain clarity, distraction must be sacrificed. To gain strength, comfort must be sacrificed. To gain freedom, immediate pleasure must often be sacrificed. Life always demands payment. The only question is whether the payment is made intentionally or unconsciously. Always demands payment. The only question is whether the payment is made intentionally or unconsciously. The unsuccessful man sacrifices his future for temporary comfort. The successful man sacrifices temporary comfort for future growth. Both pay a price. Only the outcome differs. You will notice that men who accomplish extraordinary things often possess an unusual relationship with discomfort. They do not seek suffering unnecessarily, but neither do they run from difficulty. They understand that growth and discomfort are frequently connected. The body grows stronger through resistance. The mind grows clearer through challenge. Character grows deeper through adversity. Without pressure, nothing develops fully. Through adversity. Without pressure, nothing develops fully. This is why hardship, when approached correctly, becomes useful rather than destructive. The average man asks, why is this happening to me? The stronger man asks, what is this teaching me? That single difference in interpretation changes the direction of an entire life. Every setback contains instruction. Every obstacle reveals weakness or strength. Every disappointment tests commitment. And often the moments that appear most destructive become the moments that create the greatest transformation. But only for the man willing to learn from them. Most people waste pain. They repeat the same mistakes because they never pause long enough to extract understanding from experience. They suffer, but do not grow. They struggle, but do not change. The self-directed man behaves, but do not change. The self-directed man behaves differently. He studies his failures carefully. He examines his decisions honestly. He does not protect his ego at the cost of truth. If correction is needed, he corrects himself. If improvement is required, he pursues it without excuse. This ability to confront reality honestly is rare. The ego prefers comfort. It prefers excuses. It prefers explanations that protect pride. But growth requires accuracy. A man cannot improve a weakness he refuses to acknowledge. Therefore, humility becomes strength, not weak humility, not insecurity disguised as modesty, but the strength to remain teachable. The willingness to recognize that no matter how much one learns, there is always another level of understanding available. That no matter how much one learns, there is always another level of standing available. The dangerous man is not the one who knows little. It is the man who believes he already knows enough. For this reason, true growth never ends. The successful man remains a student even after achieving success. He continues observing, refining, adjusting, and learning. He understands that life constantly changes, and those who stop learning eventually begin declining without realizing it. This creates another powerful advantage: adaptability. Rigid men break under pressure because they cannot adjust. They cling to old methods even when circumstances change. But adaptable men remain effective because they are willing to evolve. They do not abandon principles, but they refine methods. This distinction matters greatly. Principles should remain stable. Discipline, honesty, purpose, persistence, these endure. But strategies must adapt. The world changes. Technology changes. Opportunities change. And the man who combines timeless principles with adaptable thinking becomes extremely difficult to defeat. He does not panic during change. He positions himself within it. Others will begin noticing this quality in you as well. They will see that while many become emotional during uncertainty, you remain composed. While others resist change blindly, you observe carefully and adapt intelligently. This creates leadership naturally. Because leadership is not created through titles. It is created through stability under pressure. People follow those who remain clear when others become confused. They trust those who continue acting with purpose when others lose direction. And over time, influence grows around the man who has mastered himself. Yet, there remains one final understanding that separates temporary success from lasting fulfillment. A man must eventually decide what kind of life he truly wishes to build, not merely what he wants to earn, not merely what he wants to possess, but who he wishes to become. Because achievement without identity creates emptiness. Many men spend years climbing ladders only to discover they were leaning against the wrong wall. They gain status while losing peace. They accumulate wealth while sacrificing health, relationships, and meaning. The self-directed man avoids this trap by defining success carefully. He understands that wealth without health becomes burden. Achievement without peace becomes exhaustion. Power without character becomes danger. Therefore, he builds his life as a whole rather than pursuing isolated victories. He strengthens his body because energy shapes performance. He strengthens his mind because thinking shapes decisions. He strengthens his relationships because no achievement replaces human decisions. He strengthens his relationships because no achievement replaces human connection. And he strengthens his inner life because without inner stability, external success never feels secure for long. This creates balance, but not passivity. He still acts with ambition. He still pursues excellence. But his ambition is no longer rooted in emptiness or comparison. It is rooted in purpose, and purpose gives endurance. A man driven only by ego eventually burns out. A man driven by purpose continues even when recognition disappears, because his motivation no longer depends upon applause. He knows why he moves forward. And when a man knows why, he knows why he moves forward. And when a man knows why, he can endure almost anyhow. This is the transformation most people spend their lives searching for without realizing it. Not merely success in the external sense, but alignment between purpose, action, and identity. A condition where the man no longer fights against himself, where his mind, habits, standards, and direction operate together, where discipline becomes natural, where confidence becomes stable, where action becomes consistent, and where success is no longer pursued desperately, but produced deliberately through the kind of person he has become. And when a man reaches the point where success is produced through who he has become, rather than what he occasionally does, he begins to understand a truth that changes everything. Lasting transformation is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in ordinary days. Most people wait for a breakthrough before they commit themselves fully. They wait for motivation, for certainty, for the perfect opportunity. But the self-directed man no longer depends upon emotional peaks to guide his actions. He understands that destiny is shaped quietly, through repeated choices made when no one is watching. The world often celebrates visible victories while ignoring the invisible discipline that created them. A powerful body is praised, but few notice the years of consistency behind it. Financial success is admired, but few study the habits that produced it. Confidence is respected, but few recognize the countless moments where fear was overcome privately. Moments where fear was overcome privately. This is why patience becomes essential. Not passive patience that waits idly, but disciplined patience that continues working without immediate reward. The majority abandon their efforts because they expect results too quickly. They plant seeds and demand fruit the next morning. When nothing appears immediately, they assume nothing is happening. But growth is often invisible before it becomes visible. Roots form beneath the surface long before the tree rises above it. The same is true in human development. For a long period, it may appear as though little is changing. The habits feel repetitive, the effort feels unnoticed, progress feels slow. Yet beneath the surface, identity is being reshaped, and identity always produces results eventually. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Many men can act with discipline for a few days when emotion is high. Few can remain disciplined when excitement disappears. Few can remain disciplined when excitement disappears. Yet true power belongs to the man who continues regardless of mood. He trains when he does not feel like training. He works when distraction feels easier. He keeps his standards even when compromise would be more comfortable. Over time, this creates something stronger than motivation. It creates reliability. And reliability is one of the rarest forms of strength in the modern world. Most people are controlled by emotion. Their direction changes daily. They begin with enthusiasm and stop with frustration. They promise greatly but follow through inconsistently. Eventually, even they stop trusting themselves. But the disciplined man builds trust internally first. Every completed action strengthens self-respect. Every kept promise reinforces identity. Gradually, he no longer sees discipline as something he forces himself to do. It becomes part of who he is. This is an important distinction. A man who is trying to become disciplined still negotiates with himself constantly. But a disciplined man no longer debates actions aligned with his standards. He acts because it is natural to him. Identity simplifies behavior. When a man sees himself clearly, decisions become easier. The confused man wastes energy questioning every move. The self-directed man moves with clarity because his values are already decided. This also changes the way he experiences failure. Most people interpret failure personally. A setback becomes evidence that they are incapable, unlucky, or inadequate. But the self-directed man interprets failure differently. He sees it as feedback. If something does not work, he adjusts. If weakness is exposed, he strengthens it. If strategy fails, he refines strategy without abandoning purpose. This prevents emotional collapse during difficulty. He no longer ties his worth to temporary outcomes. He understands that growth involves correction. Every skilled craftsman refines his work repeatedly before mastery is achieved. Why should personal development be different? This mindset creates resilience, not the loud, dramatic kind often displayed outwardly, but quiet resilience. The ability to continue The ability to continue calmly through uncertainty. The ability to absorb pressure without losing direction. Such strength cannot be faked. It is built only through repeated encounters with challenge. And eventually, the man who once feared adversity begins to value it differently. He recognizes that easy conditions rarely produce strong individuals. Comfort may relax the body, but it often weakens the will. Pressure reveals character. When circumstances become difficult, masks disappear. Excuses lose their power. What remains is the truth of who a man has trained himself to be. This is why adversity often introduces a man to himself. Some discover weakness and surrender to it. Others discover strength they never realized they possessed. The difference lies not in circumstance, but in response. You must understand that life will test every principle you claim to believe. Patience will be tested through delay. Discipline will be tested through temptation. Courage will be tested through fear. Purpose will be tested through hardship, and these tests are necessary. Without testing, principles remain theories. Only through challenge do they become conviction. The man who passes through these experiences with awareness gains something that cannot be purchased or taught quickly. He gains depth. His confidence is no longer based on appearance. His discipline is no longer dependent on praise. His focus is no longer easily broken by distraction. He becomes internally stable, and internal stability creates external strength. At this stage, comparison also begins to disappear. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy measuring themselves against others. They compare income, status, appearance, recognition. In doing so, they lose connection with their own direction. But the self-directed man understands that comparison is often a form of distraction. There will always be someone ahead in one area and behind in another. Chasing external validation endlessly creates insecurity because the standard constantly changes. True progress is measured differently. The question becomes, am I stronger, wiser, more disciplined, and more aligned than I was before? This creates peace without destroying ambition. The man continues growing, but no longer from desperation. He grows because growth itself has become part of his nature. And this changes relationships as well. When a man becomes secure within himself, he no longer seeks constant approval from others. He no longer changes identity to fit every environment. This authenticity creates stronger connections because people trust consistency. They know where he stands. They know his values do not disappear under pressure. And in a world filled with performance and pretense, authenticity becomes magnetic. Yet authenticity must be paired with wisdom. Speaking every thought impulsively is not strength. True maturity includes restraint. The self-directed man learns that power often lies not merely in action, but in constraint. The self-directed man learns that power often lies not merely in action, but in controlled action. He does not react emotionally to every offense. He does not waste energy proving himself unnecessarily. He chooses battles carefully because he understands that attention and energy are limited resources. This creates emotional discipline, and emotional discipline protects clarity. A man ruled by impulse destroys opportunities without realizing it. Anger clouds judgment, pride blinds perspective, impatience weakens decision-making. But emotional control allows a man to remain effective even under pressure. This becomes especially important during success. Failure tests resilience, but success tests character. Many men remain disciplined while struggling, only to lose themselves once comfort arrives. They abandon standards, neglect growth, once comfort arrives. They abandon standards, neglect growth, and become careless. Gradually, success begins to weaken the very qualities that created it. The wise man prevents this by remaining grounded. He remembers that every result can change if discipline disappears. He remains teachable even after achievement. He continues refining himself long after others would become satisfied. This is why long-term success is rare. Reaching success once requires effort. Sustaining it requires character, and character is revealed through repetition over time. Eventually, all these principles begin to merge into one understanding. A powerful life is not built accidentally. It is constructed deliberately through thought, discipline, action, reflection, correction, and persistence repeated over years. No single decision transforms a life instantly, but repeated decisions transform identity, and identity transforms destiny. The man who once waited for permission begins creating his own direction. The man who once feared uncertainty learns to move through it calmly. The man who once searched constantly for answers outside himself begins developing trust within himself. This is the true shift. External success may attract attention, but internal mastery creates freedom. Freedom to think independently, freedom to act intentionally, freedom to remain steady regardless of circumstance. And when a man reaches this condition, he no longer feels controlled by the world around him. He becomes capable of shaping his own path with clarity, discipline, and purpose. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but consciously. And conscious living is what separates a life built by default from a life built by design. Built by design. And a life built by design carries a different kind of energy. It no longer moves aimlessly from one reaction to another. Every action begins to connect to something greater. The man who once lived unconsciously now starts to recognize patterns within himself that were invisible before. He notices how small decisions influence larger outcomes, how 1 hour wasted daily becomes years lost, how one disciplined habit repeated consistently can alter an entire future, how the quality of thought influences the quality of action, and how action, repeated long enough, shapes identity itself. Most people never slow down long enough to observe these connections. They live in constant reaction, moving quickly but without direction. Yet motion alone is not progress. A man may run endlessly and still remain lost if he has never chosen where he intends to go. This is why clarity becomes increasingly valuable. Not merely clarity about goals, but clarity about values, not merely clarity about goals, but clarity about values, priorities, and meaning. Many men know what they want temporarily, but very few know what truly matters to them deeply. And without that understanding, they become vulnerable to distraction. They chase what impresses others rather than what fulfills them. They pursue status while neglecting peace. They accumulate possessions while feeling internally empty. Eventually, they reach goals that were never truly theirs to begin with. The self-directed man avoids this by learning to think independently. He does not automatically adopt society's definition of success. He examines it carefully. He asks whether the life he is building reflects his actual values or merely the expectations placed upon him by others. This requires honesty, because it is possible to appear successful externally while remaining deeply disconnected internally. Many men spend years constructing an image instead of constructing themselves. But image cannot sustain a man during difficulty. Only substance can do that. Substance is built quietly. It is built through integrity when compromise would be easier, through discipline when excuses would be accepted, through patience when immediate gratification is available, through truthfulness when deception would be profitable. These moments often seem small at the time, yet together they form character. And character determines how a man behaves when pressure arrives. Pressure reveals what performance hides. A man may speak confidently when conditions are easy. He may appear disciplined while life remains comfortable, but challenge exposes the truth. When uncertainty arrives, hidden weaknesses surface quickly. This is why inner work matters more than outward appearance. The world teaches men to focus heavily on results, while neglecting the condition of the mind producing those results. Yet eventually every external achievement reflects an internal foundation. Weak foundations cannot support great weight for long. The man who builds himself carefully, weak foundations cannot support great weight for long. The man who builds himself carefully understands this. He does not rush growth unnecessarily. He values depth over appearance. He knows that rapid success without internal discipline often leads to collapse because the structure beneath it was never strengthened properly. This is why preparation matters. Most people wish for opportunity without preparing themselves to handle it. They desire greater responsibility without developing greater capacity. But life rarely rewards what a man wants. It rewards what he is prepared to sustain. If wealth arrives before discipline, it is often wasted. If influence arrives before wisdom, it is often abused. If power arrives before character, it becomes dangerous. Therefore, the self-directed man focuses first on becoming capable. He strengthens himself before demanding larger opportunities. He develops patience before seeking expansion. He learns control before seeking influence. In this way, success becomes stable because the man himself has become stable. Others may not understand this immediately. They often admire visible results while overlooking invisible preparation. They see the achievement but not the years of discipline behind it. They see confidence but not the countless moments of uncertainty overcome privately. Yet all meaningful growth follows this pattern. The seed develops underground before it becomes visible above the surface. And the strongest transformations often occur silently. This is why comparison becomes increasingly meaningless as wisdom grows. Every person moves through different experiences, different lessons, different timelines. Measuring yourself constantly against others creates unnecessary confusion because you begin abandoning your own path in order to imitate someone else's. But imitation weakens individuality. The strongest men learn from others without becoming copies of them. They study principles, not personalities. They understand that truth can be adapted without losing authenticity. This allows them to remain grounded within themselves. They no longer seek constant validation because their direction is internally chosen. Approval becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Criticism becomes informative but not destructive. This emotional independence creates enormous freedom. A man who depends entirely upon praise becomes controlled by opinion. He changes identity depending on the crowd around him. But the self-directed man develops stability within himself. He listens carefully, considers wisely, and then decides according to principle rather than pressure. Such men are rare, because independence requires courage. It is easier to follow crowds than to think independently, easier to repeat popular opinions than to examine truth personally, easier to remain comfortable than to confront difficult realities. But growth demands discomfort. Not constant suffering, but the willingness to step beyond familiar limits repeatedly. Every new level of life requires a new version of the man attempting to reach it. Old habits cannot create new futures. Old thinking cannot produce expanded results. This is why transformation always begins internally before it appears externally. The man changes his standards first. Then his habits begin changing. Then his decisions improve. Then his environment starts shifting. Eventually, his results reflect the internal transformation already taking place. Most people try to reverse this order. They attempt to change results without transformation already taking place. Most people try to reverse this order. They attempt to change results without changing themselves. They seek external rewards while maintaining internal patterns that continue producing the same outcomes. But life rarely works that way. Sustained external change requires internal alignment. And alignment creates power. When thought, action, discipline, and purpose move together, energy stops being wasted in contradiction. The man no longer says one thing while doing another. He no longer desires growth while feeding distraction constantly. His actions begin supporting his intentions, and this creates momentum. Momentum is powerful because success often compounds gradually. Small improvements repeated consistently create results far greater than dramatic effort performed occasionally. One disciplined hour daily becomes extraordinary over years. One disciplined hour daily becomes extraordinary over years. One improved decision repeated consistently reshapes entire circumstances. This is why daily conduct matters more than occasional inspiration. A man's future is usually hidden inside his routines. Observe how a man spends his time, what he tolerates, what he repeats, and what he prioritizes, and eventually his future becomes visible. Habits reveal direction long before results appear publicly. The wise man understands this and therefore guards his routines carefully. He knows that greatness is rarely built through isolated moments of brilliance. More often, it is built through disciplined repetition, maintained over long periods without applause. This requires faith in process. At times, progress may feel invisible. Others may not understand your direction. Results may arrive slower than expected. Yet the self-directed man continues because his confidence no longer depends entirely upon immediate evidence. He understands that worthwhile things require time. Strength requires time. Wisdom requires time. Mastery requires time. Strength requires time. Wisdom requires time. Mastery requires time. And lasting transformation requires time. This patience creates endurance, and endurance separates those who merely begin from those who eventually arrive. For many start enthusiastically, few continue long enough to become extraordinary. And those who do continue eventually discover something remarkable. The qualities they once struggled to practice begin to feel natural. Discipline becomes identity, clarity becomes instinct, purpose becomes embedded deeply within their daily lives. At that stage, success no longer feels distant. It becomes the inevitable result of the person they have trained themselves to become. And when success becomes the natural result of who a man has trained himself to become, fear begins to lose its authority over him. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because he no longer depends upon certainty to move forward. He has learned that confidence is not the absence of doubt, it is the decision to continue despite it. Most people wait until they feel ready before they act, but readiness is often created through action itself. The man who delays endlessly in search of perfect certainty usually remains where he is. Meanwhile, the man willing to move imperfectly gains experience, understanding, and strength with every step. This is one of the great hidden truths of growth. Action reveals knowledge that thought alone never can. A man may spend years studying success without changing his life because understanding intellectually is not the same as applying practically. Real transformation occurs only when principles move from theory into behavior. This is why courage matters so deeply. Not dramatic courage displayed publicly, but quiet courage practiced daily. The courage to begin before feeling prepared. The courage to remain disciplined when results are delayed. The courage to continue believing in your direction while others misunderstand it. Such courage gradually reshapes identity. Every time a man acts despite fear, he teaches himself that fear does not control him. Every time he keeps moving despite discomfort, he strengthens trust within himself. Over time, this creates a kind of inner authority that cannot be borrowed from anyone else. An inner authority changes the way a man carries himself. He no longer needs to exaggerate his abilities because his confidence is no longer performance. He no longer seeks constant reassurance because his direction has become internally grounded. There is calmness in him, even during pressure, because he understands that temporary difficulty does not define final outcome. This calmness is powerful. The world is filled with emotional reactions. People panic quickly, become discouraged quickly, quit quickly. But the man who remains steady gains a tremendous advantage because clarity survives where emotional chaos destroys judgment. Steadiness allows accurate thinking. Accurate thinking produces better decisions. Better decisions create stronger outcomes. This chain is rarely recognized, yet it governs much of life. Many men attempt to improve results while neglecting the quality of thought producing those results. But confused thinking creates confused action. Emotional thinking creates unstable action. Undisciplined thinking creates inconsistent action. Therefore, the self-directed man learns to observe his own mind carefully. He notices destructive patterns before they dominate him. He questions assumptions rather than accepting them automatically. He refuses to allow temporary emotion to become permanent direction. This self-awareness becomes another form of strength. Most people understand the external world better than they understand themselves. They know how to analyze others while remaining blind to their own habits, fears, and contradictions. Yet mastery always begins internally. A man who cannot govern himself will struggle to govern anything else effectively. This is why personal responsibility becomes non-negotiable. The immature man searches constantly for blame. He explains failure through circumstances, other people, unfairness, or bad luck. And while external conditions certainly influence life, the self-directed man asks a different question. What remains within my control? That question changes everything. Because energy directed toward blame produces helplessness, while energy directed toward responsibility produces power. The moment a man accepts responsibility for his thinking, actions, and standards, he regains influence over his future. This does not mean life becomes easy. There will still be setbacks. There will still be unfairness. There will still be moments where effort appears unrewarded. But responsibility creates resilience because the man no longer waits passively for circumstances to improve before improving himself. He continues developing regardless of conditions, and this separates leaders from victims. Victims wait for rescue. Leaders build solutions. Victims focus endlessly on obstacles. Leaders focus on possibilities. Victims surrender identity to circumstances. Leaders shape identity through response. Over time, these differences become enormous. The man who consistently responds with discipline, clarity, and responsibility slowly constructs a life that appears extraordinary to others. Yet what seems extraordinary publicly is usually the result of ordinary actions repeated privately for years. This is why mastery is often misunderstood. People admire the visible outcome without respecting the invisible process. They want confidence without discomfort, strength without struggle, success without sacrifice. But every meaningful achievement carries a hidden cost. The price of growth is discomfort. The price of discipline is temporary inconvenience. The price of transformation is the willingness to release old identities. Many people desire a new life while remaining emotionally attached to old habits. They want different results while protecting the patterns producing current outcomes. But transformation requires separation from what no longer serves growth. Sometimes this means leaving environments that encourage mediocrity. Sometimes it means releasing relationships rooted in negativity or limitation. Sometimes it means abandoning excuses that once felt comfortable. And often it means becoming unfamiliar even to yourself. This stage can feel lonely, not because growth isolates a man completely, but because personal evolution changes what he tolerates, values, and pursues. Conversations that once entertained him may begin feeling empty. Habits that once felt normal may begin feeling destructive. Gradually, his standards rise, and higher standards naturally create separation. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. The disciplined man does not believe he is better than others. He simply refuses to return to patterns that weaken him. He understands that environment influences identity, and therefore he becomes intentional about what surrounds him. This includes people. Those closest to you shape your thinking more than you realize. Their beliefs influence your expectations. Their standards influence your behavior. Their mindset either expands your perspective or limits it. For this reason, wise men choose association carefully. They seek people who challenge growth rather than encourage stagnation. People who value honesty over comfort. People who strengthen discipline rather than weaken it. Such relationships accelerate development because they reinforce higher standards naturally. At the same time, the self-directed man learns another important balance. He avoids both arrogance and dependence. Arrogance prevents learning because it assumes superiority. Dependence prevents growth because it surrenders responsibility. Wisdom exists between the two. The mature man remains confident enough to trust himself while remaining humble enough to continue learning. He understands that strength and openness can exist together. This balance creates adaptability without weakness, and adaptability becomes increasingly important as life changes. No man controls every circumstance. Economies shift, relationships change, unexpected difficulties appear. The man whose identity depends entirely upon external stability collapses when stability disappears. But the self-directed man builds from within first. His discipline remains during uncertainty. His principles remain during pressure. His purpose remains during difficulty. And because these foundations exist internally, external conditions cannot easily destroy him. This is true freedom. External conditions cannot easily destroy him. This is true freedom. Not freedom from responsibility or challenge, but freedom from being controlled completely by circumstance. The ability to remain grounded while the world changes around you. Few people ever reach this state because few are willing to endure the process required to build it. Yet those who do discover something remarkable. Peace and ambition no longer oppose one another. They continue striving, building, learning, growing. But they no longer move from desperation. They move from purpose. Their actions become intentional rather than reactive. And intention creates direction. Direction creates momentum. Momentum creates transformation. Until eventually the man who once searched endlessly for confidence, clarity, and purpose realizes that these qualities were not found externally at all. They were built internally, one disciplined decision at a time.